Hi everyone, my name is Arleen Westerhof and welcome to this episode of Economic Summit Africa Podcasts. And today I'm delighted to have with me Mr. Ray Sawatsky. Ray hails from Vancouver, Canada, most beautiful place in the world, I'm convinced. One of the few places I've been able to visit where it looks better in real life than it does on the postcards and the pictures. And so Ray is the president of a very special organization that we're going to talk about today, Kinvest. Ray, it's a delight to have you.
Thank you.
Yeah,
It's great to be here, Arleen.
yeah. And Ray and I, we were introduced about a year and a half ago now, I think, by a mutual friend.
Uh,
And Ray is busy doing some pretty special things in Africa. Kinvest is an organization that specializes in impact investing with an emphasis on mutuality
uh-huh.
in investing. And so in today's podcast, Ray, I'm just going to explore together with you, what that is, what does that look like in an African context. But
Mm.
before we get into that, Ray, tell us a little bit about yourself. What's your background and how did you become interested in impact investing and also in Africa?
Yeah, thank you. There's probably a very long story that goes back to high school and a very important person who God brought into my life when I was in my final 2 years of school, but that's maybe for another story. Um, but that's where I began my journey into what I thought was international development. So I spent a number of years of my life in the charitable sector, on the charity side of things, doing international development work. Most recently, before I was with before we started Kinvest, I was with Global Aid Network, which was the humanitarian arm of Campus Crusade for Christ. And we
Okay.
were doing primarily water and wash projects in Africa. I spent just under 5 years as the CEO of that organization, drilling about 300 water wells a year, which was really good work. So I don't in any way take from what I'm about to say next that wasn't good work. But I found that charity just didn't have the capacity to deal with economic change in Africa, especially in rural Africa.
Mhm.
It wasn't structured to do that. And as much as I come from a background in the charitable sector, I'm also an entrepreneur and have a good network of people around me who are very business-oriented people. And so the genesis of Kinvest, which by the way means kinship and investing together. So mutuality is built right into the fact that we are all born in the image and likeness of God and therefore kin. Um, and so we started from that proposition to think about how we would build a business or businesses that could impact rural Africa. So that's a quick answer to the question. There's obviously a lot of rabbit trails we could go down to talk about different points of intersection with sub-Saharan Africa.
Yeah, but kinship and investment
Yes.
in Africa, it's
Mm.
just, I think that's actually quite beautiful. We all know about the African concept of Ubuntu, for example,
Yes.
Ray. I'm not
Yeah.
going to expand on that. Everybody watching this will probably be aware of that. But I think this is Ubuntu, and it makes it enactable
Right.
on a level.
Yes.
For those of you watching, Ray was one of the speakers at our 2023 Economic Summit Conference here in Amsterdam called the European Africa Agenda. And one of the things that we did at that conference was that we invited people who were busy seeing change come with the initiatives that God had given them on a large scale. Before we dive into that, Ray, as Economic Summit, we use the concept of mutuality.
Mhm.
So you started a bit to talk about what
Yeah.
mutuality means to
Yeah.
you and tell us why it's necessary. Why do you think it's
Yeah.
necessary?
First of all, I think it's a beautiful economic theory, I suppose, on some level. It's very based in a biblical understanding of how we ought to interact as Christians. So we ought to be building things that do good in the world, that serve the kingdom, that that bring life instead of death. We should not be extractive, for instance. That we should treat our employees with respect and reward them in the way that we should for their labor, because every laborer is worthy of their hire. But what draws me to mutuality, I think, at a much deeper level is a question that always comes up for me when I worked with business people. I always would ask them, I would say, well, how much is enough? Right.
Okay.
Well, and how do you know what enough is? But I think that's where we often stop the conversation. The more important conversation from a mutuality point of view is, what are you going to do with the rest of it? Right. Once you know what enough is, once God gives you that insight to say, this is my enough, what do I do with the rest? And so, very practically, Kinvest as a business today is building a commercial agriculture company in Rwanda. It will employ as many as 3,500 people. But that's not the end of the story. Our enough question was, it took a large amount of venture capital from North America to do this. How much time or return do the investors get before it belongs to somebody else? And so our enough question was 10 years. Our investors in North America, they get a 10-year run with the company.
Okay.
It will give a return to them, maybe as much as 3 times their investment. But on the last day of the 10th year, something really remarkable happens, which is our mutuality in practice. They give the company to the employees through an employee trust.
Ah.
Now there's obviously there's a technical way that occurs, but practically what happens is about 1,200 Rwandans become the owners through an employee trust of the company, and the venture capital partners from Canada cease to have interest in the company at that point. And so mutuality for us became very practical. Is it 7 years? Is it 10 years? Is it 5 times the investment, or what's the IRR? We went through all those questions and went, 10 years is the enough, right? And then it needs to belong to the people who create the value, which is a game changer for them in rural Africa. So that's what mutuality both means at a theoretical level for us, also at a very, very practical way.
That's huge. That's huge, because I remember, the first time hearing that when we talked way back, Ray, and I just sat there and I thought, that's a really creative but very concrete way, of deploying mutuality in an area, and also at scale too. You talked about that project in Rwanda. Can you tell us a bit more about it, and maybe what are some of the hurdles that you encountered along the way?
Sure. Well, so the project that we're currently building, working on, is a 600-hectare commercial farming company. And so I want to be really clear. It's not a specific one farm. It's actually 3 parcels of land.
Okay.
But that company is building out that land, all environmentally sustainable irrigation systems, which is a game changer in Africa as well. So the capital we raised went into building high value modern farms, still that take care of the land through conservation mindsets, but these are irrigated properties. They will grow everything from coffee to avocados to chili peppers to French beans. A wide variety of horticulture takes place on this property. And the business model is very simple. It's a simple farming model whereby the sale of the produce drives the revenue in that company. It returns a return to the investors. For about 7 of the 10 years, the investors will receive dividends.
Okay.
And that company is built out to first of all take farming and agriculture into the 21st century, do it in a modern way. But the real piece is, first of all, if we believe in mutuality, we need to have 2 values at work. And so Kinvest only has 2 values. One is we believe in human potential, and we believe that from a spiritual point of view.
Okay.
Right. So if we're made in the image and likeness of God, we're given these incredible talents, gifts, and we're responsible for those. How do we work with every single person in the company to see their human potential brought out in the way that they can serve, work, find dignity in their work, and also learn to be contributing members to the community, to their church, all of those sort of things. So we work on that as part of our business model, actually, for everyone. And currently in our development phase, we have about 700 people working today for the company. It will grow to, like I say, about 3,500 by late next year, actually.
Okay.
And they're organized into groups around farm managers that act in a very pastoral way with them, not just work related, but also how do we care for you? How do we care for your family? What are the conversations that you need to have? What are you struggling with? Let's start the day with prayer and devotions before we go into the fields, right? So we do all of those kinds of things as well to make sure that our company serves um, that concept of seeing everybody fulfill their human potential that's given of them of God. And then the second value we have is local ownership. This needs to become owned by those who create the value.
Yeah.
That starts with paying a proper wage, a living wage, right? And that has to be built into the business model. And then slowly over time, we bring them into the idea of being owners of the company. So that's Kinvest. That's what we're working on today. We're in various stages of development. So on the coffee front, we're already the largest single estate coffee plantation in Rwanda.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
yeah, so that's we have over 57,000 trees on one of our properties that will bring their first harvest this year. So exciting things are happening. I might have diverted from your question a little bit, Arlene. I have a tendency to do that,
No, but you know what? There are exciting things that are happening.
yeah,
Just going to go back for a moment. You're
yeah,
talking about the managers, that they kind of act pastorally also too.
yeah,
And that's for some who are watching a bit of a unique concept, I can imagine, because for many, business is business,
mhm,
and those kind of things don't really enter into it structurally.
yeah. So I grew up in the era of theology, which I think was problematic, where we said there was this sacred secular divide.
Yeah.
I simply don't believe in it, Arlene. So from the standpoint, if we truly believe, I think everything is sacred.
Yeah.
And every action we take in this world either brings life or deals death. There aren't neutral actions. And so if we're extractive of labor or resources, that's obviously very easy way to see how we're doing damage. But I think that when we don't take the opportunities to invest in the lives of the people who are around us,
Uh-huh.
you know, we have a choice to do that or not. And so we choose to. Right? Do we do it perfectly? So one of the things I don't believe in is telling stories that are too good to be true. Does every one of our farm managers do this, perfectly? They do not, right? There's a long journey to go on here. But the intentionality around this is to say you have 30 to 50 people from the community in your charge every day. That's a responsibility you have, right? And it's one that you have to engage with at a thoughtful, spiritual way. And so that's our intentionality. And our farms are beautiful places. I love going early in the morning and just listening. Because I have a theory if there's a choir in heaven, it's going to be primarily led by Africans for sure. Uh, and I know I shouldn't say things like that, but it's beautiful. It's just a beautiful place to be at 6 a.m. when they're singing and preparing for the day.
Wow. Well, you know what? I can only imagine one of these days, Ray, and it won't be too long in the future, Lord willing, I want to get there to see it with my own eyes. For those of you who are watching, I know that Ray is a man of high integrity. And so when he says something is working like this, it really is working like this. Ray, you then put the stuff turning things on their heads, but you established that agricultural
Yeah.
company, and then you also provide a route to market.
Yes. So that was you asked about challenges.
Yeah.
So when we first started working on this 4.5 years ago, we believed, I think naively, that there would be a buyer's network that would be able to take all of the produce we grow and be able to sell it into different markets. And I think that was a naivety we have. And one of the obstacles we had to overcome was local buyer networks are not properly capitalized. They don't have robust sales channels around the world. Rwanda, for instance, every agriculture product but one sells internationally at a discount. Coffee, by the way, is the only one that sells at a premium. So those were challenges we had to face. So along the way, we realized, well, we're going to have to do more than just build an ag company. We're going to have to work on the value chain as well. And so we have done some work on that. It's still I think, a work in progress, but we've developed a sales and marketing channel into Europe and the Middle East. In fact, in Dubai today, you can find a product on grocery shelves that say Kin Fresh on it.
Ah,
Produce as good as the story. And um, and so we are selling our chili peppers right to the retail level in certain parts of the world. Other parts take it at a wholesale piece. And so we're working on that value chain as well. And that's a more complicated business than actually running a farm on some level. So
yeah, I can imagine that. How many employees or do you have as Kinvest? Because this is a huge
yeah.
undertaking.
Yeah, so on the farm side, which is the thing that's
Yeah.
invested by the investment fund, we have about 20 employees at a head office level. So developing a proper C-suite to run and manage this company into the future. And there would be about 650 to 700, depending on the day, in the fields. And by the way, we're paying a wage that's at least now 5 times the minimum wage for agriculture in Rwanda. So that's
That
also
was going to be my
part
next question. It's
of yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
part of making sure that your employees are well cared for.
It's a professionally run company, and that was one of the things that we decided early on, is that this needs to be done as we would in any other space with a commercial enterprise, professionally run from the C-suite right down to the frontline employee.
Wow, that is huge. Ray, we've been talking about examples of what you're doing, but tell us, do you have any examples of Kinvest working with other NGOs? And the reason why
Yeah.
I'm asking is because I notice NGOs are also waking up to the fact they need to change the way they operate. They can't just knock on the door of business people any longer and say, will you give to us?
So before I answer your question, I just want to make one statement that it might come across a little proud, but Africa, sub-Saharan Africa is not the only place we want to influence.
Okay. Tell
I
us,
want
where
to
else are you busy?
Yeah, well, so this might not be the answer you're expecting. Uh, in North America, for instance, as in Europe, so much of our engagement with Africa has been through the NGO model and through deploying aid, right? And so part of what I think is part of my missional space is to help educate, like you, I think, which is why I love what you're doing, help educate the donor investor space to say there's other ways to deploy capital in Africa if that's what you care about. There's other ways to tackle issues of poverty. And so I think when you say the NGO space is waking up to that, that's an influential space Kinvest hopes to be in the future as
Okay.
we go forward. So yes, we actually do partnerships with a couple of different NGOs. One of them I think you know well, which is Tear Fund.
Yep.
We also work with One Acre Fund.
Okay.
And what we do in that space is we have hired, I would describe a fairly strong agriculture team
Uh-huh.
to lead our projects, but they can also then help serve in other spaces as well. And so working alongside somebody like Tier Fund who's invested in farmer education, we can bring another layer to that, and we can also act as the off-taker for their produce as well. So because we're building value chains, both Tier Fund and One Acre Fund have been partners to us in education of farmers and helping build co-op networks as well, which are not Kinvest related,
Okay.
but we help with those, and then we provide a sales channel especially for avocados and chili peppers. So that's one way we're working with them. With Tier Fund especially, I think we share a value in terms of how we engage with the world. We share a faith together. I met that's actually a product of your conference in Amsterdam. I met Sass in Amsterdam, and we've gone on to do some work together. So that's I think a really beautiful connection that you helped bring together as well.
Yeah, I'm delighted. I spoke to Sas a little while ago, and he was saying, this has helped us so much as a Christian NGO to change, or at least to cement the change in how we liaise with business now to see change come. And I think that's great. So if I hear you
Beautiful.
correctly, Ray, NGOs need to start engaging with businesses, not so much only by saying, I need your money, but also, can we work together so that I have access to your supply chain.
Yeah, I think that's a great starting point. And I also think it's a way of saying, how do we deploy? I'm going to use the term capital because I think charitable dollars, aid dollars, are a form of capital.
Yep.
How do we deploy capital in ways that actually create reoccurring sustainable revenue in local communities? So what I sometimes say Kinvest was formed out of three conversations. And one of them was with a head of a project I had it when I worked at Gain, a really beautiful gentleman named Patrice who led our projects in Benin. And I had a donor trip. I had this very wealthy group of donors, and we were showing them the water wells that they had helped fund. And we'd come into every village, and this one donor would just, in this angry, frustrated way, he would just was so negative about African culture and laziness, and there's all these things that need to be done, and nobody's doing any work. And by the third or fourth day, I sat down with Patrice and I said, I need to have an answer for him tomorrow. I need to take this on and say this is not right. But I said, I don't know what the answer is. And he said, well, Ray, it's not that there's laziness, and it's not that they're not aware there's no work. There's no cash in the village to pay for that work. The village has no circulating economy that actually would function to drive those activities that need to take place that your donor is seeing that needs to be done, but there's just simply no economy that would sustain it. And so part of what Kinvest hopes to do is help build economy by injecting wages into the community. So I would always challenge NGOs to say, you need to build what you're building with local wages, with local employees who will earn those wages, so that your capital is at least going to create a lift in the community because the people have income to go out and drive entrepreneurship other places. That conversation was so important to me because I knew from Economics 101 that there's a velocity to a dollar.
Yep.
Right? The dollar has a multiplying effect, but if the dollar's not there, it can't multiply.
And that's a big mindset change, I can imagine, for many of us in the Western world, because not even able to conceive of that dollar not being there, whether it's a dollar or euro or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. So we have to bring the dollars there in a way that is sustainable, that drives the. So I think we need to stop giving. And by the way, what I mean by that is, backing semi trucks of shoes up to villages and handing them out.
Yep.
And starting to create businesses that serve that same economic space, so that there's actually economic generation that takes place.
Yeah.
And that's what Kinvest wants to do alongside the NGO space, not to replace it, but alongside it.
Yeah, you know what? You just mentioned something that's really, really key. I remember, we've got to stop giving. And I remember after the earthquake in Haiti a number of years ago, more than a decade ago now, there was a real big push by many churches in particular to give shoes, because many people didn't have shoes. And we did it out of the goodness of our hearts, but the effect was that the local shoemakers went out of business.
Of course, yes. And we do so much like that, and I tread carefully into this space because there's so much good-hearted work that is done in that space. But anytime we put goods for free into a community, whether it's shoes or shoe boxes or other kinds of economic gifts, we actually have to look at what the economic implications of that are, right?
Yeah.
Where are there people who earn their living in a space that you just replaced their sales with free?
Yeah.
And if we did that in North America or Europe, there's actually a term for this. It's called economic dumping. And governments protect against this, right? And yet at the same time, we see charity sometimes stepping into these spaces. And I know I'll ruffle feathers with this, and they're actually doing economic dumping in some level with the right intentions, but often with disastrous outcomes. And there's a lot has been written about this. Brian Fickert has written about this a lot.
Yep.
And others. So I think we need to start thinking through that, and thinking about the implications of our actions.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Ray, this has been fascinating. One last question for you.
Yeah.
What's your dream for Africa?
So I saw that question on your pre-work for me, and I thought, how am I going to answer that? I first of all, really, if I sit at 10 years, 15 years from now, and I look at sub-Saharan Africa, I'd love to see a whole lot of Kinvests at work, not the ones that we own, if you will, or started, but I hope this is open source, and I just want to share it with people, and if people want to build businesses like this in the value chains and other spaces, and it's starting to happen. We see others doing this. That excites me. Africa's really young.
Yeah.
So, the average age is just around 20. It's for North Americans, I know I speak from that, it's the equivalent of our baby boom era. It's happening right now. They're young, they're ready, they want to start things. My LinkedIn is filled up every day with young Africans going, give me a job, give me, I want to do something. I get excited about that. And I think if we can provide opportunities for this generation in Africa, they have an opportunity to change the world. And, even something like in agriculture, 65% of the world's unused arable land is in sub-Saharan Africa. Like, the opportunity is incredible. So that's one answer I would give to your question.
Okay, is there another answer you would give?
I think another answer, and it's the slightly more controversial one. I've often said, how do I know I'm successful at Kinvest? And I answer in a very opaque way, and I say, I want to be able to go into the churches and the communities where Kinvest farms are. And I want to ask the pastor two questions. Is your church fully funded by your congregants? And if he says, yes, it is, then I believe we've done something important, because then the economic resources to fund that church or churches are in the community now already.
Yeah.
And I hope you'll be able to say we're no longer dependent on international funding to keep this church alive, right? And the second question is, or the second part of that is, I want to ask that pastor to tell me about his community.
Okay.
Right? And what he says next will be part of the story of whether Kinvest is successful in the parts about helping create not just people. If you think about that farm worker who starts with Kinvest, where her best opportunity was 50 cents a day, working 100 days a year,
Yeah.
to 10 years later, that's not what we pay, by the way. That's kind of typical in Rwanda. To 10 years later being a 1/1200 shareholder of a $40 million company, where her shares position is worth like $35,000. That journey can't just be about money.
Yeah.
It has to be about what kind of participant in the community she is as well. And I think the pastors will be able to tell me that. And so I really believe that thriving, flourishing communities are what my dream is. And so, to end this cleanly, John 10:10 is my dream.
Okay.
I want to see John 10:10 fulfilled in rural Africa.
John 10:10, Jesus said, I've come that they may have life, and life abundantly to the full. Yeah.
Yeah, or have it. But the first part of that is, the thief comes to steal and destroy.
Yeah.
So let's actually take this on head on and go, but I have come that you might have life and have it to the full. What does life to the full look like in rural Africa? Doesn't look like it like for you and I. It looks different.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to replace my life or just plant my type of reality in theirs, but I want them to know the fullness of life. And that's economic, that's spiritual, that is community, that's thriving churches, all of those things. That's my dream.
I can't add anything else. That's wonderful. Ray, if people want to connect with you and find out more about the work that you're doing in Kinvest, how can they do that?
Sure. Kinvestpartners.com is our website. We're on LinkedIn as well as Kinvest Partners. We do have a charitable arm called the Kinvest Impact Foundation.
Okay.
Slightly disconnected from what we're talking about today. So if you're looking at us, you'll find both. And connect with me, Ray at kinvestpartners.com. Happy to chat. I love what you're doing, Arleen. I think that your project is incredibly important, because it's actually about showing the way forward for us as well. So thank you for this.
Oh, you're very, very welcome, Ray. Ray, it's been a real joy to have you with us. And so thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
And for those of you watching, I hope you found this as fascinating and as inspiring as I have. One of the themes in all of these podcasts is that it's possible for one person, when they depend on the Lord, to make a difference, a real impact. And so, Ray, this absolutely fits in with this. God bless you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.